anybody who's been to Davos will let you know that you will bump into the who's who, the who's who, right? And today I've been fortunate enough to bump into Bolaji here. If you don't know, she's integral in helping to shape the ways as a creative industry it looked. Formalizing the informal sector and bringing it together, helping to consult with brands and helping them to understand how to finance, how to build, and how to scale. Bolaji, thank you. I'm so excited you stopped me. Please talk to me a little bit about what you're building.
I'm so happy to meet you, and thank you for that little intro. I think for me, like the work that I've been doing over the couple of years is to sort of like formalize and archive the identity of the creative industries, and that's been happening in every sort of like project that I've worked on, in art, in fashion, in music, in film, is to basically create the system where we are documenting who we are, and we're actually documenting it with purpose, if that's like in digital format or in like a much more large long form format. And I feel like for us to move from an informal standpoint, we need to first of all identify ourselves. Who are we, and what is the Nigerian creative economy? What is that? What are the expressions that come out of us that are authentic to us? What are the different ways in which we express ourselves that is unique to the Nigerian, that is very Nigerian, right? And if that cuts across food and how we dress and how we express ourselves in music and fashion and film. And so my work beyond just documenting has also gone behind the scenes, working with people, with brands and firms on production. How do we produce the experiences and the stories that we tell to the world? How do we make sure that we put them on the global scale, but also make sure that the world is part of, it's not an isolated discussion, but we're creating this segment, this non-fragmented version of the Nigerian creative ecosystem and making it global and putting it on the global stage.
That for me is really impressive, because one of the big themes for me is narrative control.
Yeah.
And I feel like having people like you within the ecosystem changes those conversations. There's been plenty of conversations about the fashion industry, for example. Tailoring in Nigeria is impeccable, right? It's definitely chef kiss a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But it's usually very fragmented. A lot of people working in silos, no true infrastructure. And it is people like you that are helping to bring that together. And from a former investor standpoint, kind of looking at that and being like, oh, actually, now this is something that's a little bit more palatable. How are you finding actually having those conversations with creatives though? I mean, being a creative yourself, but understanding that creatives and people within the more structural realm typically have different language sets.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad that you asked that, because I've sort of seen myself as someone that straddles between creative and commerce, right? And because I have worked in the creative industries and I work behind the scenes, I know exactly the language that the creatives speak. But I think over the years, I've sort of pivoted into making sure that I consult with like the Lagos State Arts and Culture Ministry, and so they understand from a policy standpoint how the people on ground are working. I'm also working with like finance companies and banks to sort of like bring into the fold these non-oil exports examples that they keep touting. And I'm like, fashion, music, film is part of this non-oil export that you should be talking about. So I feel like with your question, the onus is not really on the creative to sort of like speak this language exclusively. It's creating the ecosystem, and also just me pivoting out of sticking with just the creatives and moving into policymakers and also with financial institutions, so that they understand the identity that we've built on and the things that the investable projects that they are in the creative economy.
And how far do you feel like that will go in terms of helping with pricing? Because pricing is also a huge conversation, right? Just this morning I was on my way here looking on Threads and saw that someone was talking about they could have bought something at a different company in Europe for cheaper. And it was like, well, you're not in Europe, and why are you not attaching the value to this craftsmanship here? So walk me through that a little bit.
I think it's a unique issue that we face as African creatives, because the world has sort of like consumed everything, and then they see us through this lens. And I think that the opportunities that we have through our narrative like discussions is to show the world exactly who we are. And we can't use the same measurement tape to sort of like measure everyone's performance. And when it comes to pricing, we're limited by what the global economies sort of like is in the restrictions of the global economies, and also within the Nigerian economy. And so we can't outprice ourselves of the Nigerian economy. People are really looking for ways to be more competitive. I think that when things get a little more formalized and businesses are able to scale, then we can discuss like all these things that people say, oh, I can't buy for $1,000 because I'm buying Dolce & Gabbana. But if we look at the actual craftsmanship and the storytelling and the tailoring, we could compare these these brands and these clothes to what the world has to offer. But I think the perception, which is the biggest thing for me, is the perception of people buying into Nigeria or Africa, and they expect that the quality will be not as on the global stage, and so they expect the pricing to be different. But I think it's a double-sided issue which is being faced by make sure that the quality is amazing, but also make sure that the pricing and the investments are coming into the sector to give it this sort of like level playing field as a global key player.
And speaking of investment, I'm the ambassador for Visit Nigeria. One of our cornerstones is to make sure that we are driving the economies outside of the core 1% that are getting invested in, right? We have diasporans who are coming in and they want to invest. Not all of them have $1 million to invest, but not everyone needs $1 million. Some people need 1 million naira.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, what does that look like in terms of due diligence when you're kind of working through the really informal, fragmented sector? And how does someone like you pull that together?
Yes, and so it also brings me to my first point. It's like you need an aggregator, right? And so when you're going into any market, you would go to meet who is aggregating it, whether the informal markets, or you would go to the people that are in that are sort of like standardized, like the market standardization has happened. But in the creative industries, it's so fragmented and it's so many little players that is why my job really is to fill in that gap, provide the right information. These are the investable projects that we have in the creative industries, in fashion, in music. But without that aggregation and that like identity sort of like sync, we're just discussing, right? And so that's why this work is very important. That's one of the reasons why I'm here, just to make sure that the conversation is not left out in the non-oil exports, especially in Nigeria House. I feel like we discussed so many other avenues to like creating economies for Nigeria. And we kind of leave this as a little like side note, but I'm very, very sure that in the next couple of years we'll be having a different discussion, Charmaine.
And if you could meet one person from one sector that you feel could help you to steer your ship in the right direction today at Nigeria House, who would it be? Not necessarily someone who's on the list, but if you're just your dream person to bump into and be like, you're the person who I feel like could help me to unfold some of these or dot some of these I's.
There are a couple of them, but I think for me at the moment, one of the most pivotal people is the Minister for Trade and Investment. She's really at the forefront of like pushing, and also I know that she loves like the creative industries. So it's an easy like discussion and she understands. And I feel like, if she wasn't in that position, it would be her still, because she's sort of like the person that would push for the creative industries. Secondly, if I'm allowed to, okay, actually you said one. So I'm going to leave it as, the Minister of Trade and Investment, Jumoke Oduwole. I think that I'm solidly backing her to be this sort of like spokesman for the creative industries. I'm counting on her to make sure that we formalize this sector very soon, in a couple of years, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.